Silver plating is such a pain in the... Greetings. Today's guest is a Benge 2X Plus trumpet made in Anaheim, California in approximately 1973. 2X, 3X, 4X, these were the model numbers of Benge at that time. 2 refers to the bell. I doubt I'll be able to get a photograph of this, but there is a 2 stamped on the bell ferrule. Plus, 2X plus refers to the bore size. This was called a medium large plus bore, 464 thousandths of an inch. Right between, at that time, Benge's ML bore, which was 460, and the large bore, which was 468. And yes, I'm wearing gloves because silver plating. We had to get this all dolled up for the video. I spent a lot of time cleaning inside and out, and I don't want to get fingerprints all over it. I remember once a former student came over for a lesson and said, "Oh yeah, I played a Benge for many years. I just did the same thing, cleaned inside and out, all shiny and polished, and proceeded to touch every square inch of the instrument and get fingerprints all over it." So let's keep it nice for a while, shall we? Eldon Eugene Benge was born in Iowa in 1904. Some years later, he was barely 17 years old. He presumably wrote to Herbert Clark asking if he should switch from cornet to trumpet. Cornet, of course, was much more popular 100 years ago than the trumpet in America. And of course, this bore fruit to the famous letter from Herbert Clark replying to Eldon Benge, stating that the trumpet was just a fad, that no good soloist would play a decent melody on it, and it was part of the devil's music, jazz. Very famous letter. Maestro Clark died in, I believe, 1945. By that time, Eldon Benge had moved on to do many, many things. He was the principal trumpet of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra at only 24 years old. And then he moved on to be in the trumpet section of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And it was during that time, approximately mid-1930s, he started his experiments with trumpet manufacture. Around that time, in the early mid-1930s, presumably F. Besson trumpets were having difficulties because of the quality of the brass that they were able to obtain. This led players to start looking for other solutions, and Eldon Benge, I believe he had 3 F. Besson trumpets at that time, used those as the inspiration for his own experiments and design and eventually manufacture of the Benge trumpet. Someone had done this perhaps 10 years previously in New York. It was Vincent Bach. The Bach Stradivarius is very heavily reliant on elements of the original F. Besson design. It's widely recognized, widely known. So let's talk a little bit about this Los Angeles or Anaheim example that we have here from the mid-70s. Still stamped Los Angeles, California on the bell, but the factory had been moved to Anaheim in 1972 because the company had been bought by H.N. White, King Brass Instruments, the parent company of King Brass Instruments, but the Los Angeles stamp remained. I can only assume that the differences between Model 1, Model 2, Model 3 are most obviously the bell, as they're all stamped somewhere or other, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. The only other difference I would think might be the lead pipe. I have been unable to find any specific information about different lead pipes, Benge lead pipes, if they are actually different. I assume they are. There's no propaganda about the manufacturer stating that this lead pipe is such and such and this other lead pipe is such and so, like you would with Bach. They have so many lead pipes and there's always a little description which you can believe or not as far as the qualities of the lead pipe and what it can do for you. So that's a mystery. I don't know if anybody knows about that. Joe Lill has a great website. I believe he did his doctoral thesis on the history and design of Benge instruments, and he has a lot of documentation on his website, as well as the possibility to purchase a copy of his doctoral thesis. So I'd have to look into that a little bit further. There might be some information there, but definitely not in advertisements of the time that I've been able to find online. There's no description at all of either bells, shapes, flares, or lead pipes, venturi, etc. So that's still somewhat of a mystery. Mr. Benge, unfortunately, was killed in a traffic accident in 1960. At that point, his son Donald took over the business, and eventually the company was sold to King, H.N. White, as I mentioned before. Zig Canstol becomes the president. Of course, Zig Canstol had already worked for Olds and then went on to manufacture his own instruments for many years until his death some years ago. Benge is sold to Conn-Selmer. We know Conn-Selmer was this giant behemoth that swallowed up many, many brands and presumably designs. I believe Zig Canstol maintained the machinery and tooling and designs. This was eventually bought by BAC in Kansas City, supposedly to restart the Benge production. That was in 2019, and this is now 2026, and there's been nothing, as far as I'm aware of, regarding the restart of Benge production. Canstol worked with Donald Benge somewhat. They put out the Burbank trumpet during some years, and that was supposed to be quite successful. Again, at that very same time, Zig Canstol was in charge of the manufacture of the F. Besson remakes. F. Besson was still a trademark owned by Boozy and Hawkes. And of course, the resemblance between this horn and those F. Bessons, there is another video on the playlist of an F. Besson Canstol that I owned for some time. The resemblance is uncanny, as is the resemblance between the original F. Bessons that Eldon Benge copied for his own designs and the actual instruments that he manufactured. So here's a look at some of the propaganda from the mid-70s. When I was an up-and-coming trumpet student, you needed a pro horn, you needed a step-up horn, and basically the two brands that were knocked around were Bach and Benge. Getson a distant third. Claude Gordon, of course, had his own model, the CG model, which was a dual bore model, not like the Vindobona Bach Stradivarius, which was a telescoping bore, starting small and getting bigger. It was a large bore horn that had a choke at the bell ferrule. So the bore of the bell was actually MLP, medium large plus 464. Which I believe it's rumored to be a mistake by one of the workers at the factory. It's also rumored that Mr. Gordon got really angry until he actually tried the trumpet. So that was the birth, supposedly, of the Claude Gordon model. I'd really love to check one of those out. This is the only Benge that I know and have owned. And I bought it in, I think, 2008. They're increasingly more difficult to find in good shape and at a reasonable price. So, well, just keep our fingers crossed, and maybe I'll come across a Claude Gordon that's worth purchasing. Some famous players that used Benge trumpets during most of their careers. Lester Bowie. On the classical side, Timofey Dokshizer, Russian trumpet player from behind the Iron Curtain. I wonder how he got that Benge. Premiere recording of the Aratunian Trumpet Concerto with full orchestra. Check it out if you can find it. Amazing. And on the pop scene, Herb Alpert. Look at that album cover. Look at that photo. I think somehow I was attracted to the trumpet because of this album cover, because it was in our childhood home. And I thought, wow, that looks really cool. I don't know if that's just lacquered or gold plated. Most Benges that you see, especially from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, are silver plated, but I just thought that was so cool. And the woman on his arm isn't bad either. James Stamp. He looks a lot happier here than he does on the back cover of his method book. Practice. So we heard this horn being played during the intro. By the way, the backing track that I'm using is from a method that I wrote some years ago. It's called Odd Meter Escapades. They're odd meter jazz etudes based on traditional forms, song forms, contrafactive, some standards, but they're also nice backing tracks to improvise over. That's part of the process that I illustrate in the method. So please check that out. Now we'll listen a bit more to this Benge 2X Plus from the mid-70s. Hope you enjoy. Please hit like and subscribe. Head over to Bandcamp and pick up some music, and we'll see you next time.